we have been told that success is getting to these certain places. But once you get there, if you're lucky enough to get there, you realize that it's not better than where you were before. It's just different.
Hey everyone, I'm Bianca Schultz from the Children's Book Review, and this is the Growing Readers Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of literature and storytelling. Today, a very special guest is joining us for the second time. He's a Newbery Medal-winning author known for his poignant and thought-provoking stories that resonate with readers of all ages. Please join me in welcoming the incredibly talented author, Matt de la Peña, as we discuss his inspiration behind The Perfect Place, the creative process of bringing this story to life, and the meaningful messages woven throughout its pages. Well, I'm sure you're fully aware Matt is the Newbery Medal-winning author of Last Stop on Market Street. He is also the author of the award-winning picture books Patchwork, Milo Imagines the World, Carmela Full of Wishes, Love, and A Nation's Hope, the story of boxing legend Joe Louis, as well as a number of critically acclaimed young adult novels. Matt teaches creative writing and visits schools and colleges throughout the country. Before I share our conversation, here's the synopsis of The Perfect Place. From the Newbery Medal-winning author of Last Stop on Market Street comes this moving picture book about the perils of perfectionism. Lucas goes to the perfect school in the perfect neighborhood. But life at home is not so perfect. His dad's old work truck stalls in front of the school. The electricity is out when he gets home. And he doesn't even have time to show his mom his report, on which he received a perfect score, before she rushes off to her night job. That night, Lucas dreams of a strange light, which he follows down the fire escape, into the alleyway, clear out of his neighborhood, all the way to the place where the perfect people live. Everything there is more beautiful than he could have imagined. But is it possible things aren't as perfect as they seem? This lyrical, richly illustrated picture book highlights the beauty to be found in even the humblest of homes and in a family that may not be materially rich, but is rich in love. Hi, Matt. Welcome back to the Growing Readers Podcast.
Hi, Bianca. Such a pleasure to be here again.
Yeah, I had such a great time talking with you and Karina about Patchwork. So I really wanted to say that up front, because if anybody hasn't listened to that episode, I felt like both of you shared so much wisdom in what it takes to craft a picture book, and also just, the beautiful little life nuggets of wisdom. So I want everybody to go back and listen to that episode if they haven't.
I know she's such a thoughtful creator. What am I going to do without her right now?
I really want to dive right into the book today. So I would love for you to share with our listeners a brief overview of your beautiful picture book, The Perfect Place. And I'd love to know what or who inspired you to delve into this particular narrative. So I'm hoping you can also share any personal anecdotes or maybe experiences that influence the emotional depth that this story has.
Sure. So The Perfect Place is about a little boy named Lucas who goes to a very fancy private school. And it's hard for him because he has to switch codes, I should say, from going from his home environment to the school environment. He has to almost become a different version of himself. And I think he's starting to fantasize about, what if I could just only be in this kind of fancy code? What if this was just my life? And he's starting to excel at the school. And so when he gets this incredible score on this robot report, he thinks, hey, maybe I belong here. Maybe this is my true space that I should inhabit. And so he goes home and he has this strange experience where this light leads him out of his apartment, down the fire escape, and down these streets into the nicer neighborhood where there's this fantastical place called the Perfect Place. And once he's there, it really does feel like this is where I belong. But while he's there, he's starting to notice things might be a little different from what he had expected. And especially when he sees a boy spill a little bit of orange juice, which this boy eerily looks a lot like him. He's kind of shunned and has to retreat out of the Perfect Place. And this is the first time that I think Lucas sees this place as flawed. And then he starts to think about, well, what does that mean? This idea of something being flawed. And I wonder if the flaws where I live are any worse than the flaws in this Perfect Place. And so he follows the light back home. And it turns out this light is his mom coming home from work and shining her flashlight on his robot report. I drew a lot on my college experience. I think when I was young, nobody in my family had ever been to college. And I used to think, well, this is the ultimate, is to get to college. And now I'll be among the people who sort of mold the nation, the future of the country. And when I got there, it was an incredible experience, the best experience of my life. But I also saw that, these people who I was interacting with, they weren't better than the people that I grew up with. They were just different. And that's like a huge lesson that I think most kids from working class communities have to reckon with. It's the fact that we have been told that success is getting to these certain places. But once you get there, if you're lucky enough to get there, you realize that it's not better than where you were before. It's just different.
Well, The Perfect Place, as you've kind of touched on, explores themes of class differences and also the beauty of families that are rich in love. So could you elaborate on Lucas's family and how these themes of class and richness in love play out in the story?
Sure. Yeah. So I think he has an incredibly close family and they all live together. It's a multi-generational house and it's cramped, and he's probably going to school with kids who have their own room and have a nice big bed and a very fancy decor. So, he's not sure, we sometimes are blind to what is in front of us because it's in front of us every day. So sometimes it takes moving away, even if it's just in a dream space, to be able to really see who's around you or what your context is. And I think that's probably the biggest journey for Lucas in the book, is that he's moved away from his space in order to better see it once he wakes up and he looks at his family and he sees the imperfections differently now in his house. He sees the chipped paint on the walls. But more importantly, he sees that his family's all there, gathered in the room. His mom's makeup is a bit smudged because she had the overnight shift, but he sees the beauty of his family. And I think for me, that's the most important story beat of this book, is really being able to see what's been in front of you your whole life.
Lucas initially seeks perfection in his life, but he discovers the beauty in imperfections. So how do you hope readers, particularly children, will connect with the message of finding beauty in imperfection? And can you speak to the broader message about self-acceptance and how it may resonate with children that deal with perfectionism?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because I think if I take the case of me and my daughter, we have different relationships, or at least when I was a kid and watching her grow up, we have different perceptions of what perfectionism is. So for her, she's in a beautiful school, amazing school, all these high achieving kids, and she wants to be a perfect student like the people around her. For me, it was different because I went to, a super working class school down by the Mexican border. And for me, I didn't see, kids achieving perfection. So I would be one, if I got to perfection, whereas she would be one of almost 100%. So I think we have a different relationship with what it means to be perfect. And my hope is that this story can be something different depending on what environment you're growing up in. My favorite books, my favorite picture books, there's a lot of room to understand the story. And this book in particular, I remember I finished it and I was like, I'm not exactly sure what it's really about. I just know that these are important questions that I wanted to ask. And I hope that different groups of kids will have their own understanding of what the story is, depending on their life experience. So my daughter, she might see the book and recognize herself going to this fancy school. Whereas somebody like me, if I got a hold of this book growing up, it would almost be like I was a voyeur in this experience that I had no access to. And I could watch it almost trying to put myself into the shoes of a kid like Lucas, who had this opportunity, which I never had when I was growing up. So yeah, it's hard to really pinpoint what this book is in terms of message. And in just more a general way, I would just say, like, I do love books that ask interesting questions rather than sort of provide an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always here for a discussion book that at the end there's stuff to talk about. And also, I've said this so many times on this podcast, I just love to be left with a feeling, and it doesn't even need to be like a happy feeling, or it just has to be a feeling. And as long as I'm left with a feeling and there's like some sort of profoundness where I am wanting to ask more questions, like those are my favorite books.
That's such a great way to put it. I think that's what I try to write, is a feeling, not a message.
So Lucas is navigating both the perfection at school and the imperfections at home. And so late at night, he follows that strange light that takes him beyond his house and the neighborhood. So could you elaborate on the significance of the concept of light that leads him to the perfect place?
Yeah, I think the illustrator, Paula, she did such a great job kind of highlighting that idea of the light. I think we do as a country have this perception that the more upper middle class neighborhoods are the light. That's what we're trying to get out of the darkness into the light. And I guess I kind of wanted to challenge that. I think who made up that narrative? That's such an American idea. And, also being somebody who, in all honesty, I never thought I could make it, whatever that means, make it. I grew up playing basketball. That's how I got to college. That was my world. I played pickup basketball in these dingy gyms with these guys who didn't have regular jobs and, did some shady things to make a living. And that was my world. That's where I learned the world. And I still, even though I love that space, I thought, well, the promised land or the perfect place is that, that fancy upper middle class suburban neighborhood. And I tried so hard to get there. And kind of like going to the writing world, I always thought, God, if I could ever publish a book and be like those published authors, that would be such a miracle. Like, would they ever let somebody like me in? And then you get there and you just go, oh, wow, this is just the same as every other place. It's no better, no worse. It's just somehow there's a narrative that exists that we should try to strive for the quote unquote light. So I think the book is sort of showing the narrative that exists that kids grow up underneath, and then kind of challenging what that means. And I think I love picture books that don't try to have too big of an arc. It's not this grand turn of events or a character like realizes something important that's going to stick forever. I think it's like an incremental movement to something new. And for Lucas, he sees what's going on in this place of success and thinks, oh gosh, like maybe this isn't where I want to stay either. And kind of goes back and sees his context a little bit differently. And even though it might be a darker, dingy building, I guess the human light that's in the place he's starting to recognize.
Oh my gosh, there's so many different little pockets of things you said in there that I like want to know more about. I was like imagining, a Matt De La Peña biopic where we get to learn about the shady Matt.
Oh, totally, totally.
And then, the idea of, I do like the idea of when you're feeling that moment of darkness to look for the light. Like, I think
Yeah.
that's important. But I think the part that you're touching on is so special in that, like, sometimes we put so much hope into what that light carries that it
Yes.
can be disappointing. And I think that's the little part that nuance that you've been able to capture in this book.
Yeah, it reminds me of like when you play a video game and you're trying so hard to win the game, and it's like you're playing all these hours and working so hard and figuring things out, and then you win and you have this feeling of emptiness. And the emptiness is that, winning wasn't the point of the whole thing. It was just like learning and growing as a player. So I just feel like that's the way life is. We set these goals, and sometimes achieving the goal can feel slightly empty and dissatisfied. We're dissatisfied with it, but maybe that's because the whole point isn't the arrival. It's kind of figuring out how to do it along the way.
Okay, well, you mentioned Paola Escobar's illustrations, which are just so rich in color, and they have that really inviting, almost retro feel. So, are there any specific details in the illustrations that you felt particularly brought the story to life?
Oh my gosh, I love what she did with the perfect place. It truly feels, like sparkling. And I see the awe on Lucas's face when he arrives. And that's exactly the way I had imagined it as I was writing him getting to that place, crossing the threshold of his mundane, ordinary life into this quote unquote perfect place. And, some readers might recognize that there is a flip going on between, or I should say, there's how would I say this? My son would call it a switcheroo. He's 5. But, I'm kind of interested in the where the wild things are structure, right? The little boy, he kind of gets in trouble. He has to go to bed without his dinner, and he journeys to where the wild things are. And one of the things that I thought about when I was beginning to write this book is I was like, well, what about the kids who live where the wild things are? I wonder if any of them want to journey to, Max's household where it's calm and clean and safe. And I wonder if they'd want to stay there. And so I think she really did a great job of like showing through texture and light the difference between those two settings.
I am curious when, that moment as a picture book author, when you see the artwork for the first time.
Yes.
Do you recall that moment? And when you did your first read through looking at the artwork, was there like something that surprised you that you didn't expect?
Yeah, I think it was the way she made the arches look that led into the perfect place. And I guess as a writer, sometimes I don't think visually as much. I think about the movement of the characters, but I don't think about the setting as much. So I just loved how populated she made the setting. The sort of dingy building that Lucas lives in. I loved all the stuff happening around it. And I always think the best illustrators, they don't just sort of like underscore the story, right? They bring something new to it. And I thought she really did with those two settings. So there are all these setting details that I had not imagined. Also, this is an illustrator who I still to this day have never met. And I've never worked with someone who wasn't my friend. So that was kind of interesting. I, of course, knew her work, but I had never had a conversation with her or didn't know, what was exciting to her as a creator. So it almost made the surprise even more profound because I just didn't know what to expect.
That's so fun. Well, so now I want to know how the pairing actually came. So was it like a suggestion from your editor? How did that work?
Yeah, this is an illustrator I've always been kind of following. And I didn't know if I'd ever get a chance to work with her, but I've always kind of thrown her name out there when talking to my editor. And yeah, they jumped on this one, and really wanted us to be paired together to see what would happen. And it's super exciting. Yeah.
So, are there any specific moments or scenes in the book, and it can be words or art, that hold a particular significance for you?
Yeah, 100%. So when Lucas gets home, he has this strange interaction with his grandfather. And actually, this kind of ties back to the art too. So he's sitting there, he wants to show somebody how he did on his report. So he wants validation for his work, right? And he first can't get it from his mom because she's rushing to work. He can't get it from his dad because his car breaks down. So now he's looking to his grandfather, and his grandfather's playing a really, really sad song. And he's playing out on the balcony, or the fire escape, I should say. And he says, like, well, why do you always play sad songs if it makes you upset? And his grandfather says this very strange thing, like some wise grandfathers can. They always tell you we should look for happiness, but sometimes I search for the right type of unhappiness. And this is so confusing to Lucas, and it's confusing to me. What does that mean? It's like an intriguing thought. And at that moment, Lucas doesn't know what to do with it, and he moves on. And I think this is my favorite spot in the book, just because I think that's what childhood is. You take so many things in, you don't know what to do with them right away, but they don't go away. They're inside of you. And eventually they might come out in some different way as part of you. And that's what happens at the end of the book, when he sort of echoes what his grandfather said, but he kind of uses the word perfect and imperfect as a way to do that. So I think that moment was really interesting. Now, the surprise from the illustrator palette, is there's a picture on near his bed, the grandfather's bed, because you can kind of see his bedroom, of probably his late wife, maybe Lucas's grandmother, who maybe is no longer with us. And it leads us to think, well, maybe it's her birthday, and he's sort of just thinking about her. I had never considered that in the text. I just thought, this is a grandfather who plays sad songs a lot. But I love that. I love that reading of that moment. So it gives it this extra detail that a reader can kind of look at and pick apart.
When it comes to a picture book, we think of maybe a kid sitting there with a stack of picture books scattered around them, flipping through the pages. Some are just looking at the pictures, some are able to read the words. But we also think of a caregiver snuggled up with their kid, hopefully somewhere cozy, and reading it together. And so I like to think of most picture books having a level of story that resonates with the child, but also a level of story that resonates with the adult reading it with them. And so I loved the elements of, the mishaps that happen with the dad and the truck and the grandpa singing the sad songs. I love a good sad song.
Me too.
And I don't have to work night shift. I'm privileged in that way, but I work a lot. And that moment where the mom can't read Lucas's report and has to go to work. That pulled at my heartstrings. And I had to remind myself, you know what? It's okay. It's okay. I have to work. We need a roof over our head. We need food to eat,
Yeah.
And I loved that the mom just seemed happy, this was, maybe she wouldn't want to work night shift, but this is her life. And, she had a smile on her face and left. Anyway, these moments I feel like really will resonate with adults that choose to sit and read this.
Yeah. I feel the same way. When I read picture books with my kids, I love when I'm laughing at one thing and they're laughing at another thing. I feel like the best picture books have multiple entry points. There's something with an adult sensibility that sometimes kids find too, especially upon multiple readings. But I love to be entertained too. I mean, I got to tell you, reading Goodnight Moon, I watch my kids take the story in one way, and I'm always stuck on that goodnight nobody. It's like, what does that mean? And I love just sitting in that confusion and that mystery. And so I hope that as a creator, like myself, whatever illustrator I'm working with, we can create those moments of mystery too, because they're so fun. That's what brings you back to the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I like totally went to Goodnight Moon, and I'm
I
like
know.
the
God, what a
rabbit
book.
rabbit in the rocking chair, you know?
Yeah, what's going on there? The creepy rabbit.
Okay, all right. Well, you touched on the moment of the grandfather being kind of a significant moment for you. Is there a section that you would want to read? It could be the grandpa part or a different part.
Okay. Yeah, let me find the part here. Yeah, I know the exact part that I would like to read. Okay. Baby Gabby was sound asleep in their bedroom. Lucas tiptoed past her crib to the windowsill, where he kept his small flashlight. He aimed his beam of light at the paint peeling off the walls and the broken dresser drawers before pausing at the orange juice stain on the rug. Then he slumped down on the edge of his mattress and pulled out his robot report. He shined the light on his perfect score. Late that night, a strange light shone in through a crack in the curtains. Lucas sat up, bleary-eyed, still wearing his street clothes. Without thinking, he shrugged off his covers and slipped on his sneakers and climbed down to the alley below. The light led him clear out of his neighborhood, and as Lucas followed, the streets became wider and the trees grew denser. Sagging old apartment buildings gave way to big, bright houses with vast green lawns. When Lucas came upon a towering gate made of gold, he stepped across the threshold into a glorious morning and found himself standing in the place where the perfect people lived.
I love that, Matt. I'm sitting here and I know I'm supposed to be thinking about the themes and whatnot, but all I could think right then is you have this a lot of people talk about when you're writing for children or writing for adults that you need to show and not tell. And I feel as though that is a perfect example of showing. You could have so easily said, Lucas climbed out of bed. He left his apartment. He walked down the street and he ended up at Perfect Place. But even without Paola's illustrations, I had a visual of, where he was.
Yeah, I think like that movement from his building to the perfect place is very important for me as the storyteller, just because he's noting, he's going to this wherever the light's leading him, but he's noticing that as he leaves his neighborhood, the houses get bigger, the lawns get bigger, there are more trees, there's more nature. And he's just noticing how it's shifting as he leaves this place. And for me, visually, I love that there's a bit of awe on his face. And, that, wow, this really is the better place, and that's what he's thinking in that moment.
On the flip side of the part that you read towards the end of the book, there's his return home to his old building, and the descriptions and the way that you showed that in your words, I feel like that really brought it at home. So if anybody kind of was just caught up in the story as Lucas went to the perfect place, his return home, I feel was like the icing on the cake. And it made me stop and really think about the part that you just read.
Yeah, I feel like it's strange because I connect so much to both of those journeys, because I feel like that is my memoir. You are seeing yourself moving to college and then into a profession that you always wanted. And it does seem like you're leaving something that isn't as beautiful. And then you get there and you realize, oh my gosh, I kind of had it wrong. My life was so beautiful even before this. It's not about where I am. It's about, my family and my community. And, it goes back to Last Up on Market Street, the first picture book I ever did, where I always say that book is about, you have a choice how you see the world. You can see the ugly parts of your neighborhood because they're there, But you could also, on the flip side, see the beautiful parts of your neighborhood because they're there as well. And I think that's kind of the journey of Lucas. And I feel like that in a bigger way is my journey as just a human being.
I want to point out that there's actually some really great news that The Perfect Place is releasing simultaneously in Spanish. So, how important was it for you to have the book accessible to bilingual and Spanish speaking audiences? And how do you believe this story translates across different languages?
So, I think Penguin, my publisher, Penguin Putnam, I think they've done an incredible job of taking every title that I release and publishing it on the same day in Spanish as it's published in English. So why is that important? Because symbolically, one version of the story in our majority language isn't more important than the Spanish version, which my character is growing up in that world, right? So that's his experience. He's got Spanish in the house probably as much as English. And so I think symbolically, it's saying that this isn't a story about a Mexican kid for English speaking audiences only. No, this is about, you can look at it as somebody kind of stepping in to a story and seeing somebody else's life, somebody who might live in the perfect place. But it's just as much the story of somebody who speaks Spanish in the house. And my favorite image is that grandfather in the book, some real life version somewhere reading it to their Lucas. Because I think those conversations, that's the ones that I would want to listen to. They're trying to grapple with that idea.
Here's the classic question. So as an author, and you've touched on this, how do you hope readers connect with Lucas's journey? And what do you want them to carry with them after experiencing The Perfect Place?
Yeah. So I was listening to this conversation the other day. I write at this little Italian bakery near my house. And I love going here because, I put my headphones on when I need to really concentrate. But sometimes I'm just kind of looking for something, looking for the next thing I'm going to do. And I have my headphones on, but like any good stalker, I had the volume turned down so I can eavesdrop here and there. But I heard this conversation between two parents, and they were parents of high school juniors. And they were both talking about the application process for college. And what I was shocked about is how they were both saying that their two daughters were really struggling with their mental health because they thought if they didn't get into the college they wanted to get into, then they would be failures. And somehow we have set up this idea in this country that there is failure if you don't get to go to the chosen, college or job. And I just hope readers who are growing up with that pressure can really look at that and maybe unpack, how did that story come to be? Because all of this is just a story, right? Everything is a story. We tell ourselves that success is this particular college. That's just a story. So how did that story get embedded in our minds? And so I hope young readers who are going to very great schools, surrounded by really smart kids, I hope they challenge that story before it really gets going. Because, ideally this would be a young reader looking at it. And then the kids who feel like, well, they don't matter as much because they don't live in a place like the perfect place. I hope they will look at this story where Lucas turns to his family at the end of the story and sees the beautiful imperfections of his family, which, by the way, is what every writer is looking for in story. No perfect character could ever exist in a story because it's too boring. So I hope they see the beautiful imperfections of their family and their context and their room and their city and kind of just say, well, gosh, maybe that story that's telling me that I'm living in a less than life isn't true.
I wish that was going to have been my last question for you, Matt, because that would have been the most amazing way to finish this episode. I love that. I do have another question for you, but I do want to say, yes, ideally, this is a picture book for the younger audience and hopefully set them up to appreciate the family they have. Or, I'm not even going to go into it because you just said it so beautifully, but I hadn't thought of your book as like this would be such a beautiful high school senior graduation gift, because here you're about to go off to what you may think of as the perfect place, but it's going to be hard. There's going to be these moments where you struggle, and to remember that your family is still there backing you, hopefully behind you, is such a beautiful message too. So I'm calling this as a graduation gift too.
I think that works for me.
All right. Well, I do like to give you the opportunity, if there's anything that we haven't touched on that you want to add about the book, or if there's one specific thing we spoke about that you want to re-highlight to leave everybody with, now's your moment.
Okay. Well, the book is focused on Lucas, and, we're following his story and his journey. And ultimately he's surrounded by family at the end. And, sometimes I do think about those other kids, the kids that are at his school and that are still in the perfect place. And I, as a child, had no access to the pressure they're under. It's tremendous. I used to think I didn't have as big of a life as some of the kids in the fancier neighborhoods, and therefore they were the lucky ones. But then you get to your version of the perfect place, college, whatever job you have, and you get to talk to kids who have been there their whole lives. And you just realize the tremendous pressure they're under. So I guess I hope that some readers look at Lucas's story, but also consider the kids that are still in the perfect place at the end of the book, because their lives are beautiful too. And they're under this incredible pressure, and the paint peeling off of their walls isn't the same as Lucas's, but it's still there.
Matt, it's clear to me that the perfect place isn't just about finding beauty in imperfection. It's about celebrating the richness of love, kindness, and self-acceptance. And between your lyrical writing and the vibrant illustrations of Paola Escobar, you have crafted a tale that will resonate deeply with readers of all ages, reminding us that the true perfection lies not in flawless exteriors, but in the imperfect yet beautiful tapestry of our lives. And The Perfect Place isn't just a book. It's a heartfelt reminder to appreciate the imperfect moments that will make life truly perfect. So thank you for writing it, and thank you for being on the show.
Oh, such a pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you so much for joining us on this quest for growing readers. You can visit Matt at mattdelapeña.com or follow him on Twitter and Instagram at mattdelapeña. Be sure to check out our show notes. You will find links to order copies of The Perfect Place. And remember, if you love listening to the Growing Readers podcast, you can hear it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you enjoy listening. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform to get new episodes as soon as they launch. If you're enjoying our book chats, please leave us a review. And while you're at it, grab your phone and text a friend you know would love to listen to this episode. The Growing Readers podcast is a production of the Children's Book Review. To find more books just like Matt De La Peña and Paola Escobar's The Perfect Place, I hope you'll visit us at thechildrensbookreview.com.